Huw Edwards' story should not be about him as an individual. I said at the beginning of the show, and I repeat, I know what it's like to be the person the mob is after, but for me, this story isn't about him now. He is recovering in hospital, and he says, via his wife, that we will hear his response to those allegations in time, and people will have the opportunity to say their piece. For me, it's about a huge failure at the BBC. By their own admission, the BBC's Director General, Tim Davie, only became aware of the allegations against Edwards on July the 6th, when the Sun newspaper approached him for comment. Why did no one speak to Huw Edwards then for 7 weeks after the complaint was made against him? The BBC is packed full of management, paid huge sums of taxpayers' money, remember that, and we have not heard a peep out of them. The people I want to hear from include David Jordan, the Beeb's Director of Editorial Policy and Standards, who, by the way, is paid over £185,000 a year. What about Charlotte Moore, the BBC's Chief Content Officer, on close to £500,000 of your money? Not a bleeding peep. Wendy Aslett, on over 150 grand, the BBC's Group HR Director. Surely she has questions to answer about how this whole debacle has been handled. And finally, what about Deborah Turness, the CEO of BBC News and Current Affairs, on close to £250,000? We've not heard from her. We, TalkTV, reached out to the BBC's press office, and in response, this is what they told us. We are moving forward with our fact-finding investigations. We're going to get on with this work calmly, carefully and with diligence, with full consideration of our duty of care to all involved. We will not be providing further comment whilst this work is ongoing. It just begs so many questions. Joining me now to talk about it in more detail is legendary former BBC correspondent and MP for Tatton, Martin Bell. What an honour to have you on the show, Martin. Thank you for joining me. Such a difficult one. What can BBC bosses learn from this? Should they be held accountable, Martin Bell?
I think they can learn that they need an early warning system. I think the Director General needs someone beside him who raises red flags and can see this thing coming. Previous Directors General used to have it, a man called Mark Byford, who spared them a lot of bother. There has to be a better way of flagging up situations that can damage our beloved state broadcaster.
Do you feel sorry for Huw Edwards? I feel sorry for his wife and him and the victims and everything, but it's not about him now. He's recovering in hospital, isn't it? It's about the corporation.
Jeremy, I absolutely agree. It's a personal tragedy for him and his family. But apart from the failure to flag up this crisis, I don't think institutionally the BBC should be too bothered. What they have to do is be calm and get on with their job, repair the bureaucracy where it has failed, and just go on doing what they're paid to do as a national broadcaster. There have been always crises. I've worked for the BBC for 35 years. It was never out of a crisis of one sort or another. I admit this is one, an extreme one that has involved their most senior public broadcaster, who, by the way, did his job magnificently well. My personal view is that the BBC will recover and it will put its house in order and will carry on.
Do you believe that any of the management I just outlined, do you believe that any of them will crawl out from the woodwork and speak, or do you think they will now, as you said, retract calmly to look at this, accept the shortcomings and move on?
Jeremy, I think they'll all look back on this as anyone would in the middle of a crisis. I look back on my wars, think I could have done things differently.
Yeah.
They'll look back on it. They will learn from it. And at the moment, just Tim Davie is in the firing line, but he deserves the support of all those around him. And I'm sure questions are being asked. I've been asking them myself. But believe me, I hope that the BBC will come out of this not weakened, but actually strengthened.
What questions have you been asking yourself, Martin?
I've been asking myself why they didn't flag it up earlier. And I'm a BBC loyalist. As Carol did, I risked my life for the BBC, and no one's more loyal than I am. But when something like this happens, I think, oh dear, can't you do it better? Can't you do it differently? And there's no point going through this if they haven't learned the lessons.
I agree, and I said last night, and I'd be interested in your take on this, I think the state broadcaster, but we don't have to get into an argument about individuals here. For me, the very epicenter, if you like, of the state broadcaster is trust between it and its public, the people whose living rooms every night had Huw Edwards reading the news or whatever. And I think we have to understand across the country there is genuine concern about how this has been handled. And I hope you're right, because it is an important institution, but it has to look itself in the mirror, doesn't it, Martin?
Absolutely, it does. I believe that it is. It is one of the worst crises that the BBC has been through in my lifetime, partly because it involves one of its most trusted broadcasters. I suppose this is, the inheritor of the Dimbleby tradition. I think it will come through this. It deserves to, but only if it learns from the mistakes that have been made in this past weeks.
An absolute pleasure, Martin Bell. Thank you so much indeed, BBC legend. So